"Hello, control room." The words came through the static-filled air as Captain Ethan Stone stood at the center of the bridge. The lights flickered and sparks leaped from a damaged console. Men and women hurried at their stations, calling out updates, their voices tense but steady. Ethan's eyes moved across the wide screens that showed the fleet scattered and broken. Pieces of burning ships drifting in the black void. Ethan gripped the edge of the command table. His voice was calm, though his heart pounded hard. He asked for status, and a young officer named Claire Morgan answered with clear words. The comms were weak, but they had managed to send another distress call. No answer had come back from the great powers of the stars. They had sent word again and again, yet silence was all they received. Ethan did not allow despair to show. He told his crew that someone would answer, believed it not with proof but with will. Beside him stood First Officer Luke Harper. Luke was tall, and his voice carried strength. He spoke to the crew and reminded them that they had not fallen yet. He told them that if no one answered, they would fight with what they had left. The deck shook as another strike slammed against the shields. Sparks burst across the ceiling. Men and women ducked, but returned to their tasks. One ship after another showed damage reports. Ethan ordered the formation to hold. They had to protect the transport ships carrying families and wounded. Again, Claire worked the comms, and her voice broke through the static. She said she was receiving a signal. The room fell silent as everyone turned to her. Ethan told her to open the channel. A voice came through, steady and strong. It did not belong to the great empires that had turned their backs. It belonged to a band known as the Guardians. The name carried weight, though many had thought them only a rumor. They were men and women who had fought wars no one else dared to fight. They did not serve crowns or councils. They stood for those who had no shield. The crew looked to Ethan. Hope flickered in tired eyes. Ethan asked for identification, and the voice answered with calm truth. The Guardians had heard the call and had come. Luke stepped forward and asked if their fleet could truly stand against what was pressing down on them. The voice answered that they had stood against worse and had not broken. For a long breath, the control room was silent. Then Ethan gave his answer. He welcomed them and said the fight was theirs to share. Outside the broken fleet, shadows moved. Ships scarred from old battles entered the void. Their hulls were dark and heavy, but their guns burned bright. They moved with order, each step precise, as if every pilot had trained for this single moment. On the bridge, Claire confirmed the readings. The Guardians were real. The crew began to move faster, strength returning to their steps. Ethan stood tall, and his voice carried across the control room. He told them that they were no longer alone, told them that the Guardians had come when no others would. The deck shook once more, but this time the crew did not bend. Men and women straightened in their seats. Hands moved with sharper skill. Eyes locked on the screens, not with fear, but with resolve. The first clash had not yet begun, but the tide had already shifted. Hope had returned. The call had been heard, and only the Guardians had answered. The Guardians entered the war zone with steady force. Their ships looked old and scarred, yet they moved with sharp order. They came in silence first, only their engines burning bright in the black. Then their guns lit the sky. On the main bridge, Ethan Stone watched every movement. His eyes followed the new formation as Guardian ships cut through the fire. They moved like one body, no hesitation, no waste. His own fleet had been broken and scattered, but now he saw how the Guardians turned chaos into a line of steel. Commander Luke Harper stood beside him. His jaw was set hard as he studied the battle. He said the Guardians fought like soldiers who had already faced death many times and had no fear of it. Ethan agreed. He had seen disciplined fleets before, but never this. Claire Morgan worked fast at her station, reading signals, giving numbers, calling positions. Her calm voice spread across the control room. Men and women looked at her as she called each strike, each turn, each target. She spoke with precision, and the Guardians matched her words with deadly speed. Outside, the fight grew. Enemy guns poured fire, but the Guardians did not bend. A line of 3 ships cut straight into the center, opening a path where none had been. Explosions flashed across the void as heavy cannons answered from the Guardian fleet. Ethan ordered his ships to move in behind them. The Guardians leading, his battered fleet found strength again. Together they formed a wedge and pressed into the storm. On the enemy side, numbers seemed endless, but the Guardians fought with skill, born from harsh battles. One Guardian ship was hit hard and began to spin, but even in flames it turned its last guns toward the enemy and cleared a path for others. The crew inside went down, but not in vain. In the control room, silence held for a moment as the ship broke apart. Then Claire gave orders again, and Luke called for the fleet to close the gap. No one wasted time to mourn. They fought on because the Guardians showed them what it meant to hold the line. Ethan opened the channel and spoke to the Guardian commander. The reply came from a man named Nathan Ward. Voice was deep and steady. He said they would not stop until the enemy command ship was broken. Ethan asked if they had enough firepower. Nathan answered that power was not the measure resolve was. Those words spread through the crew like fire. Men and women who had been weary now straightened. They manned their stations with new force, following orders with sharp focus. Outside, Guardian pilots flew fast runs across enemy wings. One pilot named Liam Cross led a squad of 5.
Oh man.
They weaved between heavy blasts, their guns striking with brutal aim. Liam's voice was firm in the comms as he told his team to follow him through the center gap. 3 ships were lost, but the others made it through and lit the enemy engines with fire. Back on the ground, far from the fleet, Guardian strike teams were already landing. Jackson Cole and Maria Davis led men and women into burning streets to secure a city that still stood under siege. They moved through smoke and falling stone, clearing block by block. They fought with rifles and blades when the fighting closed tight. Every corner was a risk, every step a test. Jackson called in through broken comms that the Queen herself was refusing to leave her palace. She stood firm and demanded to lead with her people. Ethan heard this and felt the weight of it. He knew her courage would lift hearts, but it would also draw danger. The fight in the stars raged on. The Guardians did not slow. Every strike they made pushed the enemy back another step. Ethan watched from his bridge and knew one truth. They had been lost before, but now with the Guardians at their side, the war had turned. Queen Elena stood in the tall hall of her palace as the walls shook from distant fire. Dust fell from the ceiling, but she did not move. Her guards urged her to leave, but she raised her hand and refused. She said she would not hide while her people bled in the streets. Outside, the city burned. Jackson Cole and Maria Davis led Guardian squads through the ruins. The air was thick with smoke and the cries of wounded. They moved from building to building, clearing paths, carrying children and the weak behind their lines. The Guardians fought with fierce skill, rifles in hand, blades ready when the fight closed in tight. Every street felt like a trap, yet they pressed forward without pause. Jackson spoke to Ethan Stone through broken comms. He reported that the Queen was still in the palace and would not leave. Ethan told him to protect her at all cost. Jackson agreed and pushed his squad faster through the chaos. In the palace yard, the enemy came in waves.
Ow.
Soldiers charged the gates with heavy fire, but the Queen's guard held. Arrows of light and steel clashed against the walls. Men fell on both sides, yet the defenders stood their ground. Maria led her squad into the yard, just as the gates broke. She shouted for her team to hold the line. Rifles roared, and blades struck. She moved with sharp skill, striking down one foe after another. Her team followed with the same relentless strength. Inside the hall, the Queen walked to the doors and watched the fight. One of her guards begged her to step back, but she refused. She took a fallen sword from the ground and held it firm. Her voice rang clear as she declared that she would fight beside her people. Jackson reached the palace steps with his men. His armor was scorched and his rifle nearly empty, but his resolve had not weakened. He saw the Queen with the sword and bowed his head in respect. Then he raised his hand and ordered his squad to form a wall around her. The enemy pushed harder, flooding into the yard, but the Guardians did not give ground. Men and women fought shoulder to shoulder, rifles firing, blades flashing in the dark smoke. Every step back cost blood, but every strike forward gave hope. On the bridge above, Ethan Stone received the reports. The city was turning into a battlefield with no safe ground. He looked to Claire Morgan and asked for options. Claire studied the maps and said the Guardians must secure the tower near the palace. If they gained control of it, the fleet could target enemy reinforcements more precisely. Ethan ordered Jackson and Maria to split their teams and take it. The fight grew even harsher as they moved for the tower. Streets were blocked with burning wrecks, walls crumbled, and every corner brought fresh danger. Maria's squad broke through first, climbing the steps under heavy fire. 2 of her men fell, but she pressed on, her rifle cutting through the last defenders. Jackson stayed with the Queen to guard her, but he sent half his squad to support Maria. The Queen herself joined the climb, sword still in hand, refusing to remain behind. Her courage sparked fire in every man and woman who saw her. They fought harder because their queen fought beside them. At last the tower was taken. Maria called in with breathless words, saying they had seized the control room. Ethan ordered the fleet to lock on new targets, and the skies above lit with precise fire that tore enemy lines apart. In the palace yard, silence came after long hours of screams and steel. Bodies lay across stone and smoke rose from broken walls. Yet the queen still stood, her sword stained, her gaze unshaken. Jackson looked at her and knew the fight was far from over. But in that moment he also knew the enemy had not broken her spirit and never would. The city stood in ruin, but the fight was not done. Smoke curled into the sky, and the ground shook with every strike from above. The Guardians had taken the tower, yet the enemy still pressed on with force. On the bridge, Ethan Stone studied the maps with Claire Morgan at his side. She pointed to the lines of fire and told him there was one weakness. The enemy command ship carried all control power through a single relay hidden behind their main formation. If that relay was destroyed, the command would fall. Ethan listened and nodded. He said they would strike it no matter the cost. Commander Luke Harper stepped forward and spoke with firm voice. He said the Guardians would lead the run. His tone carried no doubt. Ethan gave the order. Guardian pilots prepared for the assault. Liam Cross stood with his squad of 6. Their ships were battered, yet ready. Liam looked at his team and told them plain words. There would be no retreat. They would break the relay, or they would die. His squad answered with steady nods. They launched into the black and formed tight lines. As the fleet moved, the enemy guns opened with fierce fire. Light filled the sky as blasts tore across the void. Guardian ships twisted and rolled, moving like blades through storm. 2 were lost in the first pass, breaking apart in fire, but the rest kept on. Ethan watched from the bridge. His hands gripped the rail, but his voice stayed calm. He called out support fire and ordered his gunners to clear the way. On the ground, Jackson Cole and Maria Davis fought to hold the palace. Enemy waves surged from every street. Jackson shouted for his men to form barricades with broken stone and steel. Rifles cracked and blades clashed as the enemy tried again and again to break through. Maria led a push on the right flank. She ran straight into fire, her squad following close. She struck down the first line and cleared a path for the others. Her voice rang clear as she told them to drive forward. The street turned red with the clash, but her side held. In the palace yard, Queen Elena still stood with her sword. She had refused to rest. She fought beside the Guardians, her strikes sharp and sure. Men who saw her strength fought harder. She was no distant ruler. She was a shield in the flesh. In the skies, Liam's squad reached the relay point. Enemy ships swarmed to block them. Liam called for full thrust and drove straight into the fire. One by one, his squad broke formation to strike at weak points. 3 more ships were lost. Liam's own ship burned at the wings, but he pressed on. He fired all guns into the relay and then launched his last torpedoes. The explosion lit the void. The enemy command ship shook as the relay tore apart. Systems failed across their lines, formations broke, their fires slowed, and their ships drifted in confusion. Ethan saw it happen and shouted for the fleet to strike with all power. Luke Harper gave the same order to the Guardians. The fleet surged forward, blasting through the broken lines. Enemy ships fell one after another, burning in silence as the Guardians pressed on without pause. On the ground, Jackson saw the shift. Enemy attacks slowed, their lines breaking. He raised his rifle and led a charge that cleared the palace steps. Maria drove her squad through the last gate, striking down the last of the enemy that held the city square. The Queen lifted her sword high. Men and women cheered through the smoke, though their faces were streaked with blood and ash. They had not only survived, they had stood, and held. Yet Ethan knew the war was not finished. The enemy still had strength, but the tide had turned. For the first time since the fighting began, victory was within reach. The enemy fleet was broken, but not yet gone. Fires burned across the sky as the last of their ships tried to form a retreat. Guardian guns stayed locked on them, pressing hard, giving no chance to recover. Ethan Stone stood on the bridge with his crew, his voice steady as he called for the final strike. Guardian ships spread wide and closed in around the command wrecks. Their guns cut into the enemy with sharp bursts. Explosions flashed across the black until the once mighty fleet was nothing but burning fragments drifting into silence. On the ground, Jackson Cole led his men through the ruined streets. Enemy soldiers who had once stormed the palace now fled in disorder. Jackson gave no pause. He told his squad to push and end it here. His rifle barked fire as he drove forward. Beside him, Maria Davis fought with fierce skill, her blade flashing in the smoke as she cut through the last defenders. The city shook with the clash one last time, and then the silence came. The enemy was gone. Broken walls and fallen men marked every street, but the living stood with heads high. The queen walked through the yard, her sword still in hand. She looked upon her people and the guardians who had come. She raised her voice and thanked them, calling them the shield that had saved her world. On the bridge, Ethan heard her words through the comms. His chest tightened, not with sorrow, but with pride. He spoke to his crew and told them they had fought with honor and courage. His voice carried across the room, steady and strong. Men and women who had thought they would not see another dawn now felt the weight lift from their hearts. The guardians began to gather their wounded. Ships returned from the void, many scarred, some barely holding together. Yet their banners still flew, and their voices still carried strength. Luke Harper stood with his officers and said plain words. They had done what no one else would. They had answered the call when all others had turned away. Ethan stepped into the comms and spoke with Nathan Ward, the Guardian commander. He thanked him for standing with them when no empire had lifted a hand. Nathan replied with calm truth. He said the Guardians were not bound by crowns or councils. They were bound by duty to those who had no one else. Whenever the weak called, they would come. The queen entered the control room hours later, her dress torn, her face marked with smoke and blood, but her eyes unbroken. She looked to Ethan and the Guardians and bowed her head in respect. She said her world would live because of them, and their names would never be forgotten. X. And Maria stood near her, their armor burned, their hands scarred, but their spirits unshaken. They had carried the fight through the streets, and had lived to see the end. They bowed to their queen, and then to the guardians who had fought beside them. The fleet above began to clear the sky of wreckage, guiding transport ships and carrying the wounded. Fires still burned, but hope had taken root. Children stepped out from shelters, their eyes wide as they looked upon the guardians, who stood like giants among them. Ethan returned to his post at the center of the bridge. He looked at the stars, dark and endless, and thought of the call they had sent. None of the mighty powers had come. Only the guardians had heard, and only the guardians had answered. He whispered the words to himself as the silence grew calm. Humanity had proven itself the true guardian of the stars.